Hey everyone, we're going to do the second problem of this page. We're going to go over a hypothesis test when we want to compare two proportions. And so the problem that we have is the 2002, there was a survey that asked people whether or not they used a computer at work, and then they did the same thing at 2008. And so the question of interest is whether the proportion of people that use a computer at work has increased from 2002 to 2008. Okay, so we're going to do a hypothesis test. And the null hypothesis would be that the proportion from 2002, I usually subscript that, but can't do that with programming in now. So I'll just put 2002. You could call it P1 or subscript it with whatever is whatever is appropriate. But the null hypothesis is that the two proportions are equal. And then the alternative is that the proportion has increased in 2008. And so we would put 2002 would be less than 2008. Okay, so we're going to really focus on using technology for probably for most of the rest of the semester because the calculations become more difficult to do. And using technology has the advantage of taking away the calculation part of it. And also, you wouldn't have to use the table to look up the p-value. And so you can do this problem in either StatCrunch or you can do it in using your calculator. Okay, so let's just go ahead and write down the information that we need to calculate to do the hypothesis test. So x1 would be the proportion or the count in 2002. N1 is the total in 2002 that they surveyed. X2 is the count in 2008 that used computers. And N2 is going to be the number of people they surveyed in 2008. Okay, so we need these numbers to use the calculator or the computer. So let's go ahead and use the calculator first. This is a hypothesis test. So we go to stat and then test. And then it's a hypothesis test for two proportions. So we want to go to number 6. And then it's pretty simple from there. You're just entering the information just like I wrote it down here. So 916, 1343, 465, and 615. Okay, now our alternative has less than in it. So we want to select less than. And then just calculate. Okay, so here's the test statistic. Here's the p-value. Notice this is -4. That means that we put 3 zeros in front of this 4. Okay, so the test statistic was, let's see what it was. The test statistic was -3.33. And then the p-value was 0.0004. And then we'll go ahead and do it in StatCrunch because it's just as easy to do in StatCrunch. And what you want to do is go to Stat and then Proportions, and we're doing a 2 sample. And when we don't have data in the spreadsheet, it's always with summary. And then we just enter the same numbers. So 916, 1343, oops, 465 and 615. And this time I am doing a hypothesis test. We're looking at zero, always what we do for a two sample, because if you took the difference would be 0. And then we have less than in the hypothesis. Okay, so here's our test statistic, negative 3.3, I guess we'd round that up to 4, and 0.0004. Okay, so there's our results using StatCrunch. And let's go ahead and round this up to 4 while we're here. Okay, so now we're ready to state a conclusion. We are testing to see if the proportion of people who used a computer at work has increased since 2002. And we're going to use a significance level of 0.05. Our p-value is quite small. So our conclusion would be that yes, we can reject the null. And if we're rejecting the null, that means that we have evidence for the alternative, that the proportion has increased. Okay, we can conclude that because our p-value is small. Now, if our p-value was larger, we would just conclude that we cannot reject the null and we cannot conclude that the proportion has increased. Okay, but since our p-value is small, we go ahead and reject the null. Alrighty, the next thing is to interpret a confidence interval. We're going to do a 95% confidence interval. Didn't include that in the problem. And we're going to go ahead and use technology again to calculate the confidence interval. So what's nice with the TI calculator is that if I go to confidence interval for proportion for a two sample, that's letter B, the data's already entered. And it just fills it in for hypothesis test. So if I hit enter, the data is already filled in. And actually, that's not what I want. Oh, yeah, that is what I want. Confidence interval, sorry. And all I have to do is scroll down to calculate and hit enter. Okay, so our confidence interval is negative 0.116 to negative 0.032. And before we interpret that, let's go to StatCrunch and do it in StatCrunch. Okay. What's nice about StatCrunch is you can kind of do the same thing. Because you have a choice of a hypothesis test or a confidence interval. If you want both, I just go to options and then edit. And I just click confidence interval rather than hypothesis test. Okay, so there's my confidence interval in StatCrunch, negative 0.116 to negative 0.032. Okay, so let's go ahead and write that down before I forget it. So negative 0.116 up through negative 0.032. So you might find it odd that the confidence interval is negative, but that should make sense because the order that we did things in, we took the proportion in 2002 minus the proportion in 2008. And so the 2008 number is going to be bigger. And so when you calculate the confidence interval, that confidence interval will be negative because the second number in the subtraction is bigger. So this confidence interval is comparing the proportion of people that use their computers in 2002 to the proportion in 2008. Because it's negative, that means the proportion in 2008 is bigger. And I want to make sure I state that in my interpretation. So we can be 95% confident that between 3.2% and 11.6% more workers use their computers in 2008 compared to 2002. Okay, so again, I made a comparison between the two, and I stated which year was higher. In this case, the 2008 year was higher, and I said how much, by between 3.2 and 11.6%. Okay, so the last question is, does your confidence interval agree with the results of the hypothesis test? So the answer to that always is yes, but we need to explain it. And so here we concluded that the 2008 proportion was higher because the confidence interval went from a negative to a negative. In our hypothesis test, our conclusion also said that the proportion has increased since 2002. Because we rejected the null, we would expect our confidence interval to not contain 0, so to be significant. And both the confidence interval and the hypothesis test state that the proportion has increased since 2002. Let's see. So yes, both the hypothesis and the confidence interval concluded with saying that the proportion has increased from 2002. Okay, see you later.